Accusations that the Prime Minister used the Nova Scotia mass shooting to advance his political agenda are extremely troubling. We believe Superintendent Darren Campbell when he says that Commissioner Lucki pressured the RCMP to reveal certain information. We also believe that it's possible the Commissioner was pressured by the PMO and Public Safety Minister's office. These Liberals have a pattern of interfering in investigations to advance their political agenda, just like we saw in SNC-Lavalin. Will the government commit today to a full and open and transparent investigation to get to the bottom of this?
Minister, Emergency Preparedness.
Mr. Speaker, the independence of law enforcement operations is a key principle of our democracy, and it's one that our government deeply respects and one that I have always defended. At no point, Mr. Speaker, did our government pressure or interfere in the operational decisions of the RCMP. And I would take the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to direct the members to the Commissioner's statement from yesterday, in which he makes it very clear that there was no interference.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, somebody is not telling the truth, and it is not Superintendent Darren Campbell. Mr. Speaker, he did not just experience this differently. We know the Liberals have a track record of interfering in investigations when it's to their advantage, and when they're caught, they deny, then they deflect, and then they blame. It's sickening to think that they're using the worst mass shooting in Canadian history for political gain, but it is very possible. We need to get to the truth on this, Mr. Speaker. Again, I'm going to ask the Minister, I'm going to ask the government, will they commit to a full and an open investigation?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to share with the members opposite the truth. And in fact, yesterday, the Commissioner of the RCMP released a statement in which she said, and I quote, "It is important to note that the sharing of information and briefings with the Minister of Public Safety are necessary, particularly during a mass shooting on Canadian soil. This is standard procedure and does not impact the integrity of ongoing investigations or interfere with the independence of the RCMP." And she concludes, and this is important, Mr. Speaker, "I take the principle of police independence extremely seriously, and it has been and will continue to be fully respected in all interactions."
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Deny, deflect, and blame, Mr. Speaker.
The mass murder of 22 of my fellow Nova Scotians and an unborn child being used as a Liberal gun control wedge is disgusting, obscene, and an insult to the victims and their families. The detailed investigative notes of RCMP officers, which will be used in court, state political interference into this mass murder. They were contradicted by the Public Safety Minister and the Commissioner of the RCMP. Who's telling the truth? The RCMP investigators or the Liberal politicians trying to interfere in the investigation?
Honourable Minister for Emergency Preparedness.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like again to direct my honourable colleague to the Commissioner's statement, which I believe speaks for itself. The decision as to what information will be publicly disclosed regarding any investigation, as well as all operational matters, lies always and solely with the police. But, Mr. Speaker, let me also take the opportunity to acknowledge that the 2020 mass shootings in Nova Scotia has devastated families and communities, and particularly those families and loved ones of the 22 individuals that lost their lives. We should all keep them in our thoughts.
Honourable Member for Cumberland-Colchester.
Mr. Speaker, many in Nova Scotia are already concerned about the proceedings of the Mass Casualty Commission. Superintendent Campbell testified, and I quote, "The Commissioner said she had promised the Minister of Public Safety and the Prime Minister's office that the RCMP would release this information. The Commissioner then said that we didn't understand that this was tied to pending gun control legislation." Mr. Speaker, 22 individuals and an unborn baby died in my riding during this tragedy. We believe Superintendent Campbell. Does the Minister?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I said, I've never had a conversation with the superintendent, but the Commissioner who did released a statement in which he said, "It's important to note that the sharing of information and briefings with the Minister of Public Safety are both necessary and particularly during a mass shooting on Canadian soil. This is standard procedure. It does not impact the integrity of any ongoing investigation or interfere with the independence of the RCMP." And she concluded, "I take the principle of police independence extremely seriously, and it has been and will continue to be fully respected in all interactions."
Member for Cumberland-Colchester.
Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government has somehow managed to use politics to interfere with a cross-border police investigation. They hoped it would advance their potential gun control legislation. This interference further undermined the public confidence in the police investigation as to how the killer managed to obtain and smuggle illegal guns into Canada. How long after this tragedy did the minister discuss the gun legislation and the resulting order in council, which happened 10 days later, with Commissioner Lucki?
Good question.
Honourable Minister of Emergency Preparedness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would remind the member that we actually campaigned in 2019 on our promise to Canadians that we would strengthen gun control and that we would ban assault-style rifles. Mr. Speaker, in May of 2020, we kept that promise. But, Mr. Speaker, the independence of law enforcement operations remains a key principle of our democracy. It's one our government has always respected and one that I have always defended. Mr. Speaker, at no point did our government pressure or interfere in any of the operational decisions of the RCMP.
The honourable member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's becoming increasingly clear why this government wanted to have a secret inquiry on this. In a statement yesterday, RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki did not deny that she promised the Minister of Emergency Preparedness that she would release information surrounding the Nova Scotia mass shooting. People are not in the habit of making promises unless they're asked to do so. Did the Minister of Emergency Preparedness or his staff at any time ask the Commissioner to publicly release information regarding the Nova Scotia mass shooting? Yes or no?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The very short answer to the member's question is no. And finally, I would point out again to the Commissioner's statement in which she said, I take the principle of police independence extremely seriously, and it has been and will continue to be fully respected in all interactions. Mr. Speaker, that's the facts.
The honourable member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has gone from inappropriately interfering with prosecutions to interfering with police investigations. To this Prime Minister, the murder of 22 people isn't tragedy, but political opportunity. Superintendent Campbell made it clear. The Commissioner said she had promised the Minister of Public Safety and the Prime Minister's office that the RCMP would release this information. The Commissioner then said that we didn't understand and that this was tied to pending gun control legislation. Will the NDP Liberal government allow the Public Safety Committee to fully investigate this shocking revelation?
The honourable Minister for Emergency Preparedness.
And again, Mr. Speaker, I would point out to the member the statement that was actually issued by the Commissioner of the RCMP, in which he made it crystal clear.
Order. Order.
Yes, they are this person. Bill gave him the finger.
Throwing names back and forth from both sides is not going to solve the problem. I'm going to ask both sides to take a deep breath, and we'll let the minister respond from the top, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the opportunity to take a breath. Please let me reiterate that the decision as to how or when the police will release information lies with the police and the police alone. This was not a matter that the government in any way interfered with or extracted any promises for. I'd remind the members that of the Commissioner's statement in which he's made it equally clear that there was no interference in this case. And so those are the facts, and that's what I've shared with this House.
The honourable member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Mr. Speaker, multiple sources from the RCMP are accusing this government of political interference that risked police investigations into a tragic mass shooting. Leah Scanlon from the RCMP Communications is quoted as saying, the Commissioner releases a body count that we don't even have. It was all political pressure. That is 100% Minister and Prime Minister, end quote. Canadians aren't buying the Minister's excuse as he desperately tries to cover for the Prime Minister and save both their careers. If the NDP Liberals have nothing to hide, will they support the committee's investigation of this egregious political interference?
The honourable minister.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, I would advise the members that there was no interference. At no point did our government pressure or interfere in the operational decisions of the RCMP. It's been very clearly articulated in the Commissioner's statements from yesterday. But, Mr. Speaker, let me also add Canadians, including those which were directly impacted by this tragedy, have expressed great concern about how and when the RCMP shared information with the public, and that is precisely why, Mr. Speaker, we specified in the order of the reference for the Mass Casualty Commission that they examine the communications approach taken both during and after the event. That's the work of the Mass Casualty Commission, Mr. Speaker. That's the work that we will depend upon.
Le député de Belleuil-Chambly.
Monsieur le Président, c'est l'heure des bilans. Exposé à une manifestation à risque de camionneurs, le gouvernement a tardé et encore tardé avant d'invoquer la loi sur les mesures d'urgence. À la demande des corps policiers, a-t-il dit. Or, c'est faux. Les corps policiers ne l'ont pas demandé, et il y a même des ministres du gouvernement, dont la vice-première ministre, qui ont dit non, c'est un choix purement politique. Est-ce que le ministre est fier d'avoir simplement permis au premier ministre, comme un autre en 1970, d'invoquer les mesures d'urgence contre des civils sur la base de mensonges?
L'honorable ministre de Sécurité publique.
Mais oui, Monsieur le Président, je suis très fier de le travail du gouvernement pendant les blocages illégaux. On avait pris des décisions qui étaient nécessaires. Ça, c'est l'invocation de la loi de mesures d'urgence. C'est avec le conseil de le service policier. C'est exactement ce que le commissaire de la GRC a confirmé avant le comité. Et maintenant, on va collaborer avec les processus d'examen devant le comité conjoint au Parlement et même avec le juge Rouleau pour offrir le maximum de transparence sur cette décision. Et on va toujours défendre cette décision. Merci.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are shocked by evidence in the Nova Scotia mass shooting inquiry showing RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki made a promise to the then Public Safety Minister and PMO to leverage the mass murders to get gun control laws passed. The most outrageous attempt to politicize the RCMP in Canadian history. Another woman leader forced to compromise principles for political expediency. We are calling for committee to investigate this political interference. Will the Prime Minister cooperate with this committee investigation?
The Honourable Minister for Emergency Preparedness.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, of course, there was no promise, but I will again take the members back to the Commissioner's statement because I think it speaks for itself, in which she said, it's important to note that the sharing of information and briefings with the Minister of Public Safety are necessary, particularly during a mass shooting on Canadian soil. This is standard procedure. It does not impact the integrity of ongoing investigations or interfere with the independence of the RCMP. The Commissioner concludes, I take the principle of police independence extremely seriously, and it has been and will continue to be fully respected in all interactions. Those are the facts, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for South Surrey White Rock.
Mr. Speaker, this minister doesn't need a breath, he needs ethics. 22 people were brutally murdered in Nova Scotia, including an RCMP officer and a pregnant mother, by a gunman with illegal firearms. What did the Prime Minister do? Coerce the RCMP Commissioner to use those innocent deaths to support a political agenda. Canadians now know they pressured the Commissioner to subvert an active investigation into mass murder. Canadians believe Superintendent Campbell. Shame on this government. Why did they politically influence and jeopardize a mass murder investigation?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with respect to the suggestion and the question about my ethics, I'll just consider the source and ignore the comment. Mr. Speaker,
I'm just going to cut that off for a second. No, wait. On both sides, please do not throw out insults. That's all I'm asking. And I've heard it from both sides, so I'm asking both sides to calm it down. If you throw one out, you deserve it back. I'm sorry. So that's enough from both sides. And if somebody says, again, they did it first, I feel like I'm in a kindergarten yard here. L'honorable député de Charlebourg-Saint-Charles.
Monsieur le Président, à quel point le gouvernement peut-il tomber aussi bas pour se servir d'une tuerie de masse à des fins politiques? Léa Scanclan, porte-parole de la Gendarmerie royale du Canada, a dit, et je cite, « Le ministre, tous ces gens, le premier ministre, il faisait pression sur ce que nous pouvions et ne pouvions pas dire. C'était une pression politique. Ce gouvernement est totalement immoral. » Est-ce que le premier ministre peut nous dire qui de son cabinet a décidé de politiser la Gendarmerie royale du Canada et quand sera-t-il démis de ses fonctions?
L'honorable ministre, the honourable minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm happy to advise this House no one made a choice to politicize the terrible tragedy, the murder of 22 people in Nova Scotia in 2020. Mr. Speaker, the independence of law enforcement operations is a key principle of our democracy. It's one that our government deeply respects and one that I have always defended. And at no point, Mr. Speaker, at no point did our government pressure or interfere with the operational decisions of the RCMP, including their communication strategy. I direct the members to the Commissioner's statement from yesterday, where she makes it very clear that there was no interference.
L'honorable député de Sherbrooke-Saint-Charles.
Monsieur le Président, pourtant, le surintendant Campbell de la GRC a déclaré, je cite, « La commissaire a dit qu'elle avait promis au ministre de la Sécurité publique et au bureau du premier ministre que la GRC publierait cette information. Pour qu'elle puisse faire cette promesse, il aura fallu qu'on lui demande de le faire. C'est pas la première fois que le premier ministre et son cabinet abusent de leur pouvoir. Ils essaient de nous faire croire que les enquêteurs de la GRC mentent, mais les Canadiens voient ce qui se passe. Nous, les conservateurs, on croit le surintendant Campbell. Est-ce que le premier ministre le croit?
The honourable minister.
Speakers, I've already made it clear I've never had a conversation with Mr. Campbell. The conversations between the Commissioner and her subordinates are something that she can speak to. However, I would reiterate for the member opposite that the independence of law enforcement operations is a key principle of our democracy, which is respected and defended by our government. And to assure the member, at no point did our government pressure or interfere in any of the operational communication decisions of the RCMP. I would direct the member to the Commissioner's statement in which he makes it crystal clear that no such interference took place.
The honourable member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Mr. Speaker, there are very disturbing allegations that this government directed interference in an ongoing police investigation. Nova Scotians have suffered, and they deserve answers. The idea that any government would compromise an investigation for their own political gain is insulting for families of the victims. Any interference from the Prime Minister's office is completely unacceptable and breaks Canadians' trust in our institutions. Will this government launch a full investigation into these disturbing allegations to give Canadians the answers they need?
Honourable Minister.
And, Mr. Speaker, I will have to repeat once again that there was no interference. We did not place any pressure upon the RCMP for any reason. Mr. Speaker, several months before, we had made a promise to Canadians that we would ban assault-style rifles, and, Mr. Speaker, we kept that promise. But this terrible tragedy in Nova Scotia had nothing to do, was certainly not to be used, but, Mr. Speaker, we know that these weapons used in mass shootings are used for the purposes of killing as many people as possible. And, Mr. Speaker, we were highly resolved to act.
The honourable member for Church.